Hello, this is a video about the topic of scatterplots for the Statistics Unit 3. It is the first video of two that will be for Statistics Unit 3. The topic today, as I mentioned, is scatterplots. And a scatterplot is a variable that relates two variables to one another. So unlike the other graphs that we have studied so far, this is a graph that goes with lists of two different values. So that's what makes this unit different than anything that we've studied previously, is it's a two variable graph. We've talked about box plots, we've talked about stem and leaf plots, we've talked about histograms. All of those are one variable graphs. Okay, so two important vocabulary terms are the explanatory variable and the response variable. So we do have two variables, and one of them we could think of as being the cause, and the other, the effect. That doesn't mean that there always has to be a cause and effect relationship, but if there is, the cause is the explanatory variable. You can see the word, almost see the word explain right in there. So it's the cause, it's explaining what's happening. And the response is like the result or the effect. If there is a cause and effect relationship, this variable, the cause, is the x variable, whereas this guy is the y variable. So if we were graphing on the coordinate plane, this would be where the cause would go, and this is where the effect would go, if there is a cause and effect. And those two variables, again, are also referred to as the explanatory and the response variable. Okay? So here is a series of descriptions where I want you to think about if it would be reasonable to suggest that there is a cause and effect relationship between the two variables, or if it's just two things that have something to do with each other, but it's not necessarily cause and effect. So the first question says, the amount of time a student spends studying for a stats exam and that student's grade on the exam. Do we think that this is cause and effect? Okay, so there can be other things that would influence this, like how tired or awake the person is at the time, if they're emotionally in a good place, if they ate breakfast that day, all sorts of things. But hopefully, the time spent studying and the grade do have something to do with each other, and hopefully it is a cause and effect where the amount of studying would be the explanatory variable, and the grade would be the effect or the response variable. Saying this does not mean that only studying affects the grade. It just is saying that studying is something that affects the grade. There could be other things as well, as we mentioned just a second ago. Okay? The second thing, the weight and the height of a person. Does your weight determine how tall you are? Not really, not exactly. And does your height determine your weight? Not exactly. I mean, these are two things that are definitely connected. As children grow, for example, the taller they become, the heavier they have to be. But there also are other variables that influence that, such as the other ways in which you take care of or don't take care of yourself as a person could influence your weight. So this is a more reasonable situation for maybe just exploring the overall relationship. The two things definitely have some sort of a connection, but it's not necessarily cause and effect. One doesn't necessarily precede the other. Okay, statement 3, the amount of yearly rainfall and the yield of a crop. Does one of these then cause the other? I think it would be fair to say yes, that the amount of rainfall is going to be a cause that in part determines how much of a crop grows. Okay, if you have a very decent amount of rain, you're going to be able to grow more corn than if it was a very dry year or an overly wet year, even for that matter. So we would say that this would be our explanatory or a cause, and this one would be a response. Again, denoting this doesn't mean that it's only rainfall that matters. Certainly fertilizer, sunlight, and so forth, soil condition, has something to do with the yield of the crop as well. It's just saying it is a cause, not that it's the cause. Number 4, the students' grades in stats and their grades in French. Does one of these cause the other? When you do well in this class, do you do better in French? When you do better in French, do you do better in stats? Maybe. I actually think this is a great example of something where there's actually a third variable. This is going to be called a lurking variable. That's a vocab word coming up later on in class. There's actually a third variable that isn't listed here that actually is probably influencing both of these, both the grade in math and the grade in world language. And that would be work ethic or intelligence or perseverance. Those are things that could influence both of these things. So it's not that one causes the other. We would want to explore the relationship perhaps. Because my guess is that although there of course are exceptions, generally speaking, someone who's doing well in one class is doing pretty well in another class. Not always, but a lot of the time. And that is because of those other factors like diligence and perseverance and hard work and study skills and so on. Okay? The fifth one, the occupational class of a father and his son. This one I could see arguing both ways. Historically speaking, in the 20th century and earlier, if your parent were in a higher class, more white-collar job, then it would be much more likely for that person's child to be of a similar occupational class. This isn't quite as cut and dried in more recent times than it has been earlier. Generally speaking, one does cause the other, and it's the class of the father that causes the occupational class of the son. But that isn't, like I said, as clear anymore. So I could see either answer here, but if you did mention a cause and effect, the father's occupational class is the cause, and the effect is the class of the son. And that's just because of the sequence in time in which it happens. Okay? All right. So now that we've talked about those two terms, explanatory and response variables, let's talk for just a quick minute about what scatterplots actually are. Scatterplots are graphs where you have a bunch of dots or ordered pairs or points just flung out on a grid. So scattered, that's what it sounds like actually. The points that you have represent the two variables that come in pairs, and those points get plotted on a coordinate plane. It would look something like, axes like this, and then just dots all over the place. Okay? And so if these two variables were the amount of annual rainfall, like we talked about, and the yield of a crop, maybe in one year we got 5 inches of rain, and it was a very dry year, and the yield of our crop was 10 bushels per 100 acres or something like that. This would be the point that represented that ordered pair 5, 10, for example. So each of the ordered pairs would represent a pair of dots that went together in some way in our data set. When we look at our scatter plot, we want to look at 3 different things: form, direction, and strength. This is a very good thing for you guys to pay attention to. It very well could be a quiz or a test question. Form refers to what shape the graph takes overall. You want to notice if there are a lot of clusters or if there's a linear pattern or some other kind of pattern. So for example, a scatter plot that has this sort of shape or form, we'd say it has the form of sort of a parabola or some kind of arch where it goes up and then down. So the shape is referred to as form. Direction is a matter of whether the graph tends to go uphill, like this one, or tends to go downhill, like this one. If it goes uphill, we say that there is a positive association. Whereas if it goes downhill like this, then we say that there is a negative association. In more specific terms, what this means, the positive association means that as one variable gets bigger, the other variables are getting bigger too. So this ordered pair is a big number for x with a big number for y, whereas this ordered pair has a small x value and a small y value. So those two things kind of go together. In a negative association, a point like this one is a large value for x, but just a little value for y. Those go opposite each other, so it's a negative association. The third attribute that we look for in a scatter plot is its strength, and that is how close the points lie to a particular form or shape, such as a line. So if I have points that are like this, Those maybe, you could say, have a positive association, but there's a lot of scatter. Whereas if my points were like this, there's still a positive association, but not nearly as much scatter. This graph has a stronger correlation or a stronger match, whereas this one is weaker, a weaker strength matching up or a weaker correlation. That is our entire lesson for today. Thanks for listening to this beginning lesson, and please make sure I see your notes in class.